Welcome to Casual History with Brenna. I'm your historian, Brenna, obviously, and today I'm going to talk about the bloody Countess, Elizabeth Bathory. I have a couple quick disclaimers before we get started. My first disclaimer, I don't speak Hungarian, so I will do my best with pronunciations, but I'm not going to guarantee that I'm 100% correct in those. Please bear with me. Second disclaimer, this story features violence, blood, torture, mentions of incest, and some sexual themes. Viewer discretion is advised. Alright, let's get into it. Elizabeth Bathory was born in a family with rampant incest. This led to her and her siblings experiencing fits of epilepsy, mood swings, migraines, and violent episodes. She witnessed a lot of violence in her childhood. She watched the execution of a woman accused of kidnapping and selling children into slavery. The woman was killed by being sewn into the stomach of a horse. At age 15, Elizabeth's cousin, King Stephen Bathory, cut the noses and ears off of rebellious peasants. This brutal childhood set her up for an adulthood of cruel intentions. At age 15, Elizabeth married Ferenc Nadasdy, who had violent tendencies of his own. Nadasdy was often off at war, where he was called the Black Knight. It's said that Nadasdy would toss Turkish prisoners into the air and catch them on the tip of his sword. He also taught Elizabeth inhumane ways to punish disobedient servants, such as placing oil-doused paper between the servant's fingers and setting it on fire. He also gave Elizabeth gloves with clawed fingers to punish her servants. While Nadasdy was away, Elizabeth visited her Aunt Clara in Vienna, where she was introduced to lesbian orgies, sorcerers, seers, witches, and alchemists. After returning home, she brought a couple of witches to court. She even wrote to Nadasdy, instructing him on how to cast spells on his enemies. Eventually, though, her husband died while away at war. Following his death, Elizabeth became obsessed with her mortality and youth. One day, Elizabeth struck a servant, and the servant's blood dripped onto Elizabeth's skin. After the blood was wiped away, Elizabeth's skin appeared more youthful. Elizabeth then called upon her accomplices to help her drain the woman's blood for her to bathe in. This is when the killings began. Elizabeth had her witches and friends torture and kill virgins in a variety of sadistic ways. They would drain women to create bloodbaths, hang women from the ceiling, and slice them open so Elizabeth could have a blood shower, and slice them up in other ways. Elizabeth claimed that peasant blood was not as effective as noble blood, so she opened a school for the daughters of noble families, so she would have only the best victims for her blood rituals. Though eventually, people started to get suspicious, but they couldn't arrest her unless they caught her red-handed. The Palatine, a high court official, showed up at Elizabeth's castle, where they found several dead women, as well as a wounded woman who claimed Elizabeth and her co-conspirators had tortured her. Elizabeth was arrested and charged with vampirism, sorcery, and celebrating pagan rituals. She was sentenced to life in prison, where she was walled up in a tower with only a small hole in the wall for food. Elizabeth died only 3 years later. Her reign of terror was officially over. Well, actually, what if everything I just told you was a lie? What you just heard was what many people believe to be the true story of Elizabeth Bathory. But evidence suggests otherwise. I will now tell you the true story of Elizabeth Bathory. Let's debunk some of the myths. 1. Elizabeth was insane due to being the offspring of an incestuous relationship. For starters, Elizabeth wasn't the product of inbreeding. Her parents were distantly related, but separated by 7 generations. 2. At a young age, Elizabeth witnessed the violent execution of a woman who was sewn into the stomach of a horse, which contributed to her being desensitized to violence. There is no evidence of this event happening. Executions such as these were very rare, as people thought the horse was more valuable than the person being executed. It would have been seen as a waste to kill the horse just to execute a peasant. 3. Elizabeth's husband, Ferenc Nadasdy, was a cruel and violent man during his military campaigns. From what I could find, history remembers him as a successful military leader, and some regard him as a national hero. I have found little evidence of his alleged violence against war captives, and nothing I did find was concrete or specific. 4. Elizabeth led a life of hedonism, complete with lesbian orgies in Vienna. There is no evidence that Elizabeth participated in lesbian orgies. She would have been around a lot of nobility at this time, and none of them gossiped about it or wrote it down. So you would think if something like this was going on, someone would have mentioned it, but It's just not true. 5. She was accused of witchcraft, vampirism, and celebrating pagan rituals. Elizabeth was arrested and imprisoned on December 29th, 1610. This is true. She was actually accused of murdering noblewomen, beatings, and torture. She was never accused of witchcraft, vampirism, or celebrating pagan rituals. I'll also add that Elizabeth was never actually convicted of any of these crimes. 6. Elizabeth was obsessed with casting spells and practicing occult rituals. She actually wasn't devoted to sorcery in any capacity. She was interested in herbalism, medicines, and alchemy, all of which were common at the time. 7. Multiple dead women were found at Elizabeth's estate. This is true. In 1 week in 1610, 8 women did die at Elizabeth's estate. However, these deaths coincide with a documented local plague outbreak, and letters from the time prove that Elizabeth was away in Vienna with her daughter during those deaths. 8. A noblewoman with wounds was found alive when Elizabeth was arrested. This woman testified that Elizabeth had wounded her. A young woman with wounds was found when Elizabeth was arrested. However, it is documented that this girl was recovering from a wild animal attack, and she did not testify against Elizabeth. 9. There were many people who testified against her. Numbers range from 30 to hundreds of testimonies. What is important is that none of them were first-hand accounts. They were all testimonies of rumors that they had heard. 10. Elizabeth was arrested and walled up in a tower with only a small hole in the wall for food. Elizabeth was basically placed on house arrest, in which she was allowed to have guests. This was a punishment befitting her status. She was not walled up in a tower. Alright, for my final arguments in favor of Elizabeth's innocence, let's put on our critical thinking caps. Did you put yours on? Okay, so first of all, according to a few sources and my own calculations, it would take the blood of approximately 30 people to fill a bathtub, accounting for displacement. Claims against Elizabeth talk about 1 victim tortured and killed at a time. Besides this, it would be kind of hard to kill and hide the bodies of 30 women all at once. Really think about it. How do you trick 30 women into a basement and kill all of them with none of them fighting back or running away? On top of that, the first account of Elizabeth bathing in blood was written well over 100 years after her death. Still need more facts? You got it. If noblewomen were being killed off in vast quantities, would noble families keep sending their daughters to Elizabeth's court? I don't think so. But noble families did keep sending their daughters to Elizabeth's court. And as I mentioned before, Elizabeth was arrested but never actually convicted of any crimes. She never went to court and was never judged, but she was imprisoned. The belief is that the evidence was so flimsy that they knew it wouldn't hold up in court. So it was clear that someone wanted Elizabeth out of the picture, but they couldn't risk taking the case to trial. What was the motive? Politics. Isn't it always politics? Now, I will clarify that this is just a theory, but I believe there is evidence to support these claims. For a bit of background, Elizabeth's relative, Gabriel Bathory, was the Prince of Transylvania. Tensions between Transylvania and Poland were high. Gabriel could easily move his army through Elizabeth's holdings in Hungary to invade Poland, if he wanted to. The theory is that the Polish Habsburgs may have asked the Palatine, the high court official, to remove Elizabeth Bathory from the political scene. Now, that's all very well. I mean, it's not, but anyway. I'm sure there are plenty of ways to pin crimes on a widowed woman to get her out of the way, so why did these gruesome rumors specifically prevail? There are a few reasons for this. Initially, much of what we believed about Elizabeth Bathory was a result of English scholars misunderstanding and mistranslating Hungarian sources. As time went on, the myths became more and more gruesome and violent. Hundreds of years after Elizabeth's death, men were claiming that she was tied to the occult, and that's why she reveled in violence and torture. However, many of the claims were based on local folklore that came from peasants of the area. And of course, sensationalism sells. People loved hearing about everything wrong with nobility. They were morbidly curious, but also wanted to feel like they were right in their hatred of the upper class. I always knew the nobility were evil. Yeah, maybe, but they weren't bathing in blood. So that's the history of it, but modernity still isn't that kind to Elizabeth Bathory either. There are many depictions of her in pop culture, as well as characters that take inspiration from her legend. Here are a few contemporary examples of Elizabeth in pop culture. In the TV show American Horror Story Hotel, the character Countess Elizabeth is based on Elizabeth Bathory, torture included. Elizabeth is also the villain in the show Castlevania Nocturne. I've only personally seen season 1, but I can tell you it features kidnapping and torturing young women, just as the myths say. The Guinness Book of World Records used to list Elizabeth Bathory as the most prolific female serial killer. They have thankfully changed the entry due to lack of evidence. Still, if you do a quick Google search on Elizabeth Bathory, you're likely to find just as much fiction as fact, if not more. In my opinion, Elizabeth Bathory is not a bloody countess. She is a victim of the power struggles and whims of men. A victim of those who fabricate or twist stories to entice the masses. A victim of public opinion that doesn't bother to check the facts. This is my call to action. Do not take everything you hear as fact, especially when it sounds too good or crazy to be true. If there are other historical myths you would like me to dive into, please let me know in the comments. Let's get to the truth together. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next time on Casual History with Brenna. Bye!